At the start of the story, it is the year 2005. We meet David, a 22-year-old man living in Miami who works for a massage company. But David has grown tired of making money by giving massages to rich old people. He dropped out of college after just one semester, and because of that, he had a big fight with his parents. Before this, he had already been fired from 6 different jobs, and he had also quit a few on his own. As a result, he did not have many career options left. Using all the money he had saved, David bought a batch of bed sheets and tried to sell them to old age homes. But that plan also failed because the owner of the retirement home had no real interest in making the elderly more comfortable. One evening, at a party, David unexpectedly ran into his childhood best friend Efraim. They had not spoken to each other for years. Efraim had been living in Los Angeles with his uncle and working in the weapons business. However, after his uncle cheated him out of some money, he left and moved to Miami to start his own company called AEY. While driving around together, they went out to buy some marijuana. Outside the dealer's house, a group of thugs tricked Efraim and stole his money. To teach them a lesson, Efraim opened the trunk of his car, pulled out a machine gun, and fired several rounds into the air. The thugs got scared and immediately ran away. That moment left a deep impression on David because he was tired of constantly being disrespected by people, and he admired those who had the courage to stand up for themselves. The next day, David visited Ephraim's office. Watching him work made David respect him even more. Efraim was pretending to be an army officer while talking to someone on the phone. The act was simply a trick to find out which government contracts his competitors were chasing. Efraim explained that he did not just sell guns online, he also sold weapons to the United States government. He showed David how everything worked and explained that the real money was in government contracts. On the government's bidding website, Efraim said that he never tried to compete for the huge contracts because those always went to giant corporations. Instead, he focused on the smaller contracts. Even those smaller deals were worth millions of dollars and brought in huge profits. After having lunch with Efraim, David returned home. There he found out that his wife Liz was pregnant. The news immediately made him panic. He kept wondering how he was going to support their baby. The next time David met Efraim offered him a job in the business. At first, David was hesitant because he wanted to stay away from the weapons trade. He did not want anyone to lose their life because of something he had done. But Efraim slowly convinced him with his smooth words and assured him that they were not creating wars. They were simply supplying products to governments. In the end, David agreed. When David got home, he lied to Liz and told her that they would be selling bed sheets to the army. Hearing that made Liz completely happy with his new job. Over the next 6 weeks, David learned everything about the weapons business. He searched the government's website for overlooked contracts and started contacting weapon manufacturers in Eastern Europe. People in this business were known as war dogs because they made money from wars without ever stepping onto a battlefield. Efraim also had a secret business partner named Ralph Slutsky, a local businessman who owned 14 laundry shops in Miami. Ralph's job was to finance Ephraim's weapons deals, and in return, he officially owned 25% of the company. But that 25% was never as valuable as it looked because Efraim and David were making far more money than Ralph realized. Ralph was also a devoted Jewish man. He believed Efraim shared the same values and would never sell weapons to Israel's enemies. But Efraim sold guns to anyone who was willing to buy them. He did not care which side they were fighting for. As David spent more time in the business, he became better and better at it. He even managed to make contact with Henry, one of the biggest weapons suppliers in the world, a man who had been considered the best supplier in the industry for the past 20 years. One night, after drinking a little too much at a bar, Efraim flirted with the wrong woman, and her boyfriend punched him hard in the face. Later, while the two friends were eating at a restaurant, they received a phone call informing them that they had won a contract to supply several thousand Beretta pistols to the Iraqi police in Baghdad. A few days later, David and Liz visited the doctor for an ultrasound and saw their baby for the first time. Soon, they learned that they were expecting a baby girl. But David's happy moment was suddenly interrupted when he received a call from Captain Philip Santos. Santos was extremely worried about a new law that had just been passed. Under this law, all weapon shipments from Italy to Iraq had been banned, making it almost impossible for the Beretta pistols to reach Iraq. David did not know much about the new law, but completing the contract was extremely important. So he lied to Santos and confidently told him that everything was under control and there was nothing to worry about. Fortunately, Efraim quickly came up with a solution. He suggested that they would first ship the pistols from Italy to Jordan because Jordan had no conflict with them. From there, sending the weapons into Iraq would be much easier. That same night, David and Liz hosted a dinner party at their house, where some of Liz's friends started warning David about Efraim. Liz's friends told David that Efraim had not been cheated by his uncle at all. Instead, Efraim was the one who had stolen money from his uncle. While they were still talking about it, Efraim suddenly showed up at the house without telling anyone. The moment he realized there was a party going on, he felt hurt because no one had invited him. David pulled him aside and explained that it was Liz's party with her own friends and that he had not invited anyone himself. Efraim then told David that they had a huge problem. Jordan's customs department had seized their shipment of guns. At the same time, Captain Philip Santos had also learned about it. He called them immediately, demanding an explanation and warning that if the delivery was not completed, he would have them banned from doing business with the government. They would be blacklisted and never receive another contract again. With so much pressure on them, they had to find a solution as quickly as possible. Liz overheard their conversation and was shocked when she finally realized that her husband was actually an arms dealer. Furious, she told David that she could no longer trust him because he had lied to her. Unfortunately, David did not have time to explain anything because he and Efraim had to leave for Jordan immediately. After arriving there, they received no help from the embassy because, according to government regulations, the paperwork for the plane carrying the weapons had already expired. So after bribing the local officials to release their shipment, they hired a driver named Marlborough, who was known as the best smuggler in the country. His job was to take them into Iraq so they could personally deliver the guns. David became worried about how dangerous the journey would be, but Efraim assured him that everything would be over quickly and they would reach their destination by morning. He told David there was honestly nothing to worry about. Around midnight, they reached the Iraqi border, where a group of soldiers stopped their truck. Marlborough calmly handed them a few packs of cigarettes as a bribe and told them he was just a small delivery driver carrying some important supplies. The soldiers let them pass without any trouble. Once they were back on the road, David and Efraim finally relaxed and fell asleep. When they woke up the next morning, they found the truck parked at an isolated gas station. While Marlborough was filling the truck with diesel, Efraim stepped away for a moment. Just then, David received a call from Liz. She told him that she finally understood how worried he had been about providing for their family, and that was why he had taken such a risky job. She said they could live with less money if necessary, but asked him never to lie to her again. David agreed, but he immediately told another lie by saying that he was staying at a hotel. Suddenly, he had to hang up because he noticed a group of heavily armed insurgents heading straight toward them. David shouted at Efraim to get back into the truck as fast as possible. Efraim started the engine, but the truck could not go very far because it did not have enough fuel. They did not even have time to wait for Marlborough, so they yelled for him to run and jump into the moving truck. Somehow, Marlborough managed to climb aboard, and he quickly got the fuel flowing into the engine again. At that very moment, the insurgents opened fire on them. For a few terrifying seconds, all three of them believed they were about to die. Luckily, American soldiers suddenly arrived, forcing the attackers to retreat and saving their lives. They finally reached the military base without facing any more problems. Captain Philip Santos was thrilled to see them because making it there alive was like surviving a journey through death itself. After taking a few selfies with the shipment, they received their payment, and several soldiers escorted them safely to the airport so they could leave Baghdad without any trouble. This deal earned them an enormous amount of money and also made their company well known. From that point on, the business grew even faster. Every month, they made more and more profit. They bought 2 identical luxury cars and even purchased 2 expensive homes in the same building. David also took the bed sheets he had once tried to sell to retirement homes, and together, he and Efraim burned them. It was their way of saying goodbye to their old lives forever. Ralph was so happy after seeing how much his share had grown that he decided to invest even more money into the company. That gave them the opportunity to expand the business. They hired many new employees whose job was to search for fresh government contracts. Because of this, David also got more chances to spend time with his baby daughter. However, as the company became more successful, the constant pressure began affecting both Ephraim's mind and his health. One night, David discovered that the army had posted a brand new contract that would later become famous as the Afghan deal. It was an enormous order involving unbelievable numbers, including 100 million AK-47 rounds, 2 million weapons, and much more. They realized this could be the biggest opportunity of their lives, so they traveled to Nevada, where a huge weapons expo was being held. Manufacturers from all over the world came there to display their latest weapons and technology. Unfortunately, their plan quickly fell apart. After doing the calculations, they realized that no matter how big the contract was, their company simply did not have the capacity to handle such an enormous order. They had no idea how they could sign contracts with so many different manufacturers around the world. Later, while David was sitting in a casino trying to forget his disappointment by playing cards, Henry Girard approached him. Henry was widely known as the king of the weapons business. David immediately went to bring Ephraim, and together, they met Henry for dinner at a restaurant to discuss the massive contract. Henry explained that he could fulfill the order because he had valuable connections in Albania, a country that had spent years preparing for war against Western nations but never actually fought. As a result, it still had millions of unused weapons sitting in storage. Now the country wanted to get rid of those weapons by selling them. Henry said he could obtain them at extremely low prices because otherwise they would simply end up as scrap metal. Winning this contract would be like making their biggest dream come true. Even so, Ephraim wondered why Henry was not bidding on the deal himself. Henry admitted that the United States government had placed heavy sanctions on him because they believed he had ties to terrorists. That revelation made David nervous because he did not want to work with someone carrying such a reputation. But Ephraim was only thinking about the money. He convinced David that people could be falsely accused and that it did not necessarily mean Henry was actually connected to terrorists. Eventually, David accepted his explanation and agreed to move forward with the deal. A few days later, the two of them flew to Albania so they could personally inspect the weapons. In Albania, they were assigned a driver named Bashkim. When they reached the warehouse, David and Efraim began testing the ammunition. Even though the bullets were very old, they still worked perfectly. Satisfied with the quality, the two of them flew back to Miami and submitted their bid to buy the ammunition through the government website. It took 5 months before they received a response, but luckily, they won the contract. Before allowing such a massive project to begin, the government carefully inspected every company involved. Since David and Efraim had never properly kept records or paperwork, they started creating fake financial documents and business records to make everything look legitimate. 2 weeks later, they traveled to Rock Island to meet the U.S. military officers responsible for purchasing Army equipment. Both of them were so nervous that they smoked marijuana outside the building just to calm themselves before going in. Fortunately, the meeting went smoothly, and even their fake paperwork was approved. Still, Ephraim was furious after learning that they had only won the contract because they had submitted the lowest bid. He realized they could have asked for $50 million more and still won the deal. When David returned home and told Liz that he would be leaving for Albania for a month, she reacted much better than he had expected. She said she was planning to stay with her mother along with their daughter. David asked why she wanted to leave, and Liz showed him the pictures from Iraq. She was furious because David had lied to her again. Trying to calm her down, David swore that this would be the last time and promised he would never lie again. But Liz told him she had discovered something else. She had found bundles of cash hidden under the kitchen sink without her knowledge. That was the final straw. In her eyes, David had crossed every limit with his lies, so she took their daughter and left. Before leaving for Albania, Ephraim thanked David for sacrificing so much for the company. As a gift, he gave him a gold grenade. At that moment, David showed him a partnership agreement that he had personally written so they could both sign it and officially become equal partners. After both of them signed the document, David placed it inside his desk. Even so, Ephraim did not seem completely happy. When David arrived in Albania, Bashkim was once again assigned as their driver. David kept trying to call Liz, but she refused to answer any of his calls. While the ammunition was being loaded onto trucks, David discovered that they had been deceived. The ammunition was actually made in China, and the United States government had banned Chinese ammunition. After telling Ephraim about the problem, They immediately called Henry, but Henry simply said that it was their problem now because they should have inspected every bullet before buying them. David was completely trapped in Albania and started searching all over Eastern Europe for different suppliers. A few days later, Efraim arrived at the hotel with a new idea. He suggested that they simply repackage all the ammunition into different boxes. The US government would never know where the bullets had originally come from. By using lightweight cardboard boxes, they could also save a lot of money. It was illegal, but the contract was worth so much that neither of them wanted to walk away from it. Bashkim then introduced them to his friend Enver, who owned a packaging company. They never told Enver about the Chinese ammunition. Instead, they claimed they only wanted to reduce the shipment's weight. Enver agreed to do the work for $100,000. Compared to the value of the contract, it was a very small price to pay. On December 8, 2007, they successfully delivered the first $5 million worth of ammunition to the army in Afghanistan without any problems. A few days later, on Christmas Day, Liz allowed David to see his daughter through a video call. Unfortunately, it turned out to be the last happy moment before everything changed. That same night, Efraim called US officials and reported that Henry had resold the ammunition at 4 times the original price. He wanted Henry removed from the contract because he believed Henry had tried to cheat them. David immediately tried to stop him because Henry was not someone they should make an enemy of. David believed they were already making more than enough money, and Efraim was risking the entire operation for no reason. David reminded Efraim that he was the one living alone in Albania, far away from his family, working day and night, while Efraim stayed comfortably in the United States. Sometimes, David said, it felt like they were not partners at all. It felt as if Efraim was the boss, and David was just his employee. Hearing that, Efraim told David he understood and promised not to do anything reckless. But before leaving, he secretly stole the signed partnership agreement from David's desk. He also broke his promise because only a few days later, at the beginning of 2008, David was kidnapped from his hotel room and taken to an isolated location. There, 2 thugs brutally beat him while Henry pointed a gun at him and warned that they had tried to cut him out of his own deal. Terrified, David decided he had had enough and would return to Miami. Before leaving, he went to the warehouse to collect his belongings. There, Enver angrily told him that he still had not been paid. He had also figured out the real reason they wanted the ammunition repackaged. Efraim was no longer answering any of his calls. David promised that as soon as he reached the United States, he would send the money and return within a week to finish the remaining work. Just as David was getting into a taxi, Bashkim's wife stopped him. She told him that her husband had disappeared and no one had heard from him since. His body had never even been found. After hearing that, David decided that once he escaped Albania, he would never return. Back in Miami, the first person he went to see was Liz. He confessed every illegal thing he had done for the company. He promised to leave the weapons business forever and return to working as a massage therapist. Hearing his honest confession, Liz accepted him back. After that, David met Efraim to tell him he was quitting the business. Efraim acted as if David had betrayed him and refused to pay him his share. David warned that if he did not receive his money within 2 weeks, he would send a lawyer after him. But Efraim was not worried at all because he had already burned the only signed copy of their partnership agreement. When David learned what Efraim had done, he grabbed the gold grenade Efraim had once given him and threw it through the glass wall between their offices, creating complete chaos before walking away. 3 months later, David had returned to his old life as a massage therapist. One afternoon, Ralph came to see him and said that Efraim felt sorry about everything that had happened and wanted to settle things peacefully. The 3 of them met at a restaurant. There, Efraim apologized and offered David $20 million. Instead of feeling grateful, David felt insulted. He became furious and started telling Ralph about every illegal thing they had done using Ralph's investment money. He also explained how they had always paid Ralph far less than they were actually earning. David told them that every piece of evidence was stored on his laptop, and if he wanted to, he could easily destroy Efraim. But Efraim remained calm because David's own name was also on all of the company's documents. If Efraim went down, David would go down with him. The meeting ended without any agreement. Not long afterward, David received a phone call from the New York Times. They wanted to interview him about the Chinese ammunition that had been repackaged. David claimed he knew nothing about it and immediately hung up. But now he realized the truth had started coming out, and sooner or later, he would also be in trouble. After promising Liz that he would contact a lawyer, David ran into Efraim in the elevator because Efraim had received the same phone call. Efraim suddenly started acting like the old friend David had known back in school, trying to appeal to his emotions. But David no longer trusted him. Instead, he punched Efraim hard in the face because he finally understood that they had never really been true friends. To Efraim, David had always been nothing more than a way to make money. As soon as the elevator reached the ground floor, FBI agents surrounded both of them and arrested them on the spot. Despite all the illegal deals they had made and every lie they had told the government, the mistake that finally brought them down was their failure to pay Enver. After not receiving his money, Enver contacted the U.S. Department of Defense and reported everything. The FBI immediately launched a full investigation. During that investigation, Ralph was also arrested at one of his laundry shops. Terrified, he quickly agreed to cooperate with the FBI. The restaurant meeting had actually been his plan all along, and he had been wearing a hidden microphone that recorded their entire conversation. The recording captured them admitting to all of their crimes. Efraim was charged with more than 70 criminal offenses. The recordings clearly showed that he had been the mastermind behind the operation, so he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. David, on the other hand, admitted all of his crimes from the very beginning. As a result, he received only 7 months of house arrest. They were also informed that their company would not be allowed to receive any government contracts until 2022. After serving his 7 months of house arrest, David returned once again to working as a massage therapist. To his surprise, his next client turned out to be Henry. David was nervous, but Henry assured him that he had no intention of hurting him. He said that if he had truly wanted David dead, he would have killed him long ago. Henry apologized for everything that had happened in Albania, explaining that he had been given false information. He also thanked David for never mentioning his name during the FBI investigation. David still had a few questions for Henry. He asked whether meeting him at the casino had really been just a coincidence, and he also wanted to know what had happened to Bashkim. Instead of answering, Henry placed a suitcase full of money in front of David and told him he could keep it on one condition, that he would never ask those questions again.